Um, so, just as a reminder, at the end of chapter 4, we had Timothy's or Paul's encouragement to Timothy is be diligent in these matters, so that everyone may see your progress. Paul wants Timothy to be diligent, cautious, careful in his in his development as a Christian, in his walk with Jesus. Watch your life and doctrine closely. And I think that's a really important verse there. He wants him to, what he's telling him to be careful of is that what he does, the things that he lives, matches the things that he teaches. Make sure that you got to watch your teaching carefully. That's important, but also watch your life carefully. Watch the way you live. So it's an idea of just making sure that your walk matches your talk. Persevere in them, because if you do, it will save both yourself and your hearers. And I just wanted to emphasize again that for Christians, um, walking with Jesus, following Jesus, takes things like diligence and perseverance and watching ourselves closely. It's not something to take lightly. It's something that each day we have to be careful about. We can develop bad habits, right? We can sort of slowly um, drift from our desire to follow Christ, and can start to stumble and turn away, um, and so there is a sense in which always we are being cautious and careful and persevering in our walk with the Lord, being diligent. Um, so, comments about that, or thoughts about that? Do you find diligence hard in that way? Do you find that it's work? I think it's supposed to be work. I think it's supposed to sometimes feel like work to follow Jesus. Because it does sort of often run counter to our normal reactions and our natural tendencies. We sort of have to sometimes um, discipline ourselves, I guess, to to follow him more closely. Well, if no comments about that, let's jump into chapter 5 here then. There's a little bit of a subject change that you're going to feel as we get into this. Now, I think it's still sort of part of Paul's instructions to Timothy specifically, and some of the things he's supposed to be persevering in and being careful in. Um, but it sort of shifts from the more personal attention Timothy is supposed to give to himself to more relational stuff, right?
Well, he ends the chapter 4 ends, it says, it will save both yourself and your hearers.
Yeah.
So the people that he's talking about, maybe we could say they're his hearers.
Yeah.
Maybe his congregation, that he works with.
It's a really good point. He does. It's not just himself, right? If you do, you will. The attention that you give to your personal spiritual life, your personal walk with the Lord, also has an influence then on the people who you teach and who hear you and who listen to you and follow you. Um, so this personal care you're supposed to be taking should also have an influence on those around us. We are sort of in a setting in our world, in our culture, where we think of our religious lives, our faith, as this very personal thing. Um, but you don't really see that in the Bible. It also affects the people around you. Your faith, your relationship with the Lord can also have an effect, both positive or negative, on those who see you and those who know you and those who are around you. And Paul wants Timothy to take that seriously. So yeah, it's a really good point. And he does then turn his attention to Timothy's relationship with other people. And by extension, I think there's some advice here that is good for the church in any age. And so that's what we'll pick up with in chapter 5, verse 1. One thing that strikes me as I read this is the tendency that we have as human beings, the generational gaps that tend to rise between the generations. Okay, boomer, the sort of contempt that sometimes we hold with which we look at other generations and the ways in which we can demean one another and disregard each other and disrespect each other. And there's a lot here about that has to do with that, I think. So let's look at verse 1. Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. I like those two verses because, I mean, we talk about the family of God, right? The church is the family of God. We give lip service to that sometimes, but Paul's saying, I want you really to treat each other like family. I want you really to treat each other like, I should say, like healthy family, because obviously sometimes family, human families aren't so healthy, but treat each other like a healthy family does. And what does he mean by that? Well, he means the way we're carrying ourselves toward one another. Instead of, if you wouldn't rebuke your father harshly, in our world, maybe you would. In Paul's world, you probably would not. And so he says, if you wouldn't rebuke your father harshly, don't rebuke an older man in the church harshly. Be gentle, be careful. Exhort him, sure, but treat him as your father.
Jacob, in respect, I think I heard him call mama or mother. That means older woman.
Oh, yes, yes. He referred to me that way the other day.
Yeah.
I was a little,
Let's take it back.
Now we know what it means.
Is that fairly common, Jacob? In the African churches referring to older people as mother, father, is that something that is pretty common? Yeah. Yeah, I thought so. I know I'd heard that before. I thought it must be a fairly common thing. I know the Philippines, Josh, there's a lot of auntie and uncle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of that sort of sense of family, even if they're not really family. That sort of sense, that sort of referring to one another as family. We do brother and sister in America, but we don't do mother and father. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? That may say something about us. May say something about the way we think about the generational differences and how maybe we don't always have the proper respect for those either way.
No, in fact, our culture favors young people
Sure,
and
sure.
middle-aged people.
Sure.
And that's in contrast to older people.
Yeah,
It's just the way it is. It's not a good thing, but it's the way it is.
Was it a good thing when you were younger, or was it?
Just saying overall.
No, I don't.
We sometimes lack respect for older people.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
And,
And the older I get, the more I see it.
You know, it means something if they start calling you back.
Right. Yeah. So no, I mean, it's true. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I have an older sister. It's just three of us left. And she's 87. And I don't talk back to her,
Mhm.
even though I'm almost as old as she is, but I have the utmost respect for her. And then the one that's under me is like that toward me. And I just consider her as being the head of the family.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that sort of sense is what Paul is getting at here. This understand. He's not saying obviously that, the older generation, you can't ever, challenge them or tell them when they're wrong. He says, you can exhort an older person, you can exhort an older man, but do it like you would your father, not like, not with disrespect. And it works both ways, you notice. There's also it's easy for those of us who are getting a little older, it's easy for us to say, the younger folks should treat us with respect, but Paul wants the older folks to treat the younger people with respect too, to treat them like family as
Right.
well. That works both ways.
Hmm.
And so I just think that's kind of interesting, this sort of sense of family that should just pervade the church.
What he's saying is your relationships as family is more important than your words. Now, normally we emphasize words, right? They're very important. We emphasize our language. But here he seems to be saying that the family relationship is tops.
Mhm.
And, watch what you're rebuking. I mean, he's not saying you shouldn't use words, but watch your words.
Yeah. And just that sort of sense of family ought to pervade. Again, healthy family. We don't always have healthy families in our world. I'm sure in Paul's world they didn't either. But I think he's talking about sort of the ideal here, right? That we know generally, what it ought to look like, even when it doesn't. And he wants us to be sure in the church that we're pursuing those kinds of relationships. And again, I think in a world where there's a lot of generational division and disrespect that goes both ways, quite frankly. I've heard it from older people toward younger as well. And I think Paul's saying there's not room for that among in the church. And maybe even I'd sort of extend it even farther and say maybe let's not be people who encourage and carry on that sort of generational division in our world. Let's be people that, you don't have to talk bad about people older than you or people younger than you. You don't have to disrespect those generations. You can find positive things to say. You can be helpful. You can be encouraging when you have those opportunities instead of just sort of falling in with the rest of the world and carrying on those divisions. Verse 3 then, give proper respect to those widows who are really in need. Literally it says, give proper respect to those who are really widows. And he goes on to explain what he means. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. He's picturing a situation where in the church you have older women who are widows who have no family. And he says the NIV has give proper recognition, honor is the word really, and it's a roundabout way that we'll discover later of talking about giving them financial help, taking care of them, taking care of their needs. The honor that Paul's talking about specifically is the honor of caring for the needs that they have, making sure that they have food, making sure that they're covered. Think of the early church in Jerusalem in Acts 6, right? They were dealing with the fact that there were widows among them who didn't have anybody to provide for them. And so they were taking it on themselves to provide for some of those widows. But Paul makes a distinction here between the widows and the real widows. And the real widows are the ones who really don't have anyone. And then there are widows who have children or grandchildren. I think children is literally what it says, who have descendants who could take care of them. And Paul says for them, it's the way they should put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents. For this is pleasing to God. How do we know it's pleasing to God? there a commandment about that?
Is to
Honor your father and mother, right? So Paul's referring back to the Ten Commandments, and it says you should give honor to your father and mother. You should give honor to them, and in this case, you give honor by caring for their needs, making sure they're not going without anything. And in our world, things look a little different, right? There's Social Security, there's things like that, but there are older people in the church who do need assistance and do need help and don't have family, don't have spouses living, don't have others who can help care for them. And whether they have maybe, the financial wherewithal they need, maybe there's other things that we can be doing for elderly people who are alone and don't really have anyone. We should be family for them, as Paul has been saying, right? We should be treating them with the honor of making sure they have what they need, making sure they're cared for and provided for, and that whatever we can offer them, we are willing to offer. That's a way to put our religion into practice, as Paul puts it. I was always impressed with my father-in-law and mother-in-law for years after my father-in-law retired, particularly. They would go, they'd take widows from church to the grocery store, or they would John would go to the house and make repairs for them, things like that. They would look after. They sort of took it on themselves. That was sort of their ministry. They wanted to make sure that the widows at church were provided for, had what they needed. John would pick them up, take 2 or 3 of them to the store at one time, and turn them loose in the grocery store, and then they'd all come back and he'd help them with their groceries. And that was just something that he felt strongly about, and I think that's right on what Timothy's talking about here. This sense of caring for one another, right? This is pleasing to God. He talks here about a widow who is left all alone, but who puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. Probably what you're looking at, we're gonna see it in a minute. There's a mention of a list, and so I think what Paul's referring to is a practice that the church had in this time of having a list of widows who were to be cared for. They were to receive food or financial assistance or whatever from the church. And their ministry then would be to devote themselves to prayer and to helping the church and helping the kingdom of God in that way. That's something they could do. So they would consistently be in prayer. And so that's sort of, I think, the picture that Paul gives us here. But then on the other side of that, there's the widow who lives for pleasure, who is dead even while she lives. So you have also on the other side, somebody who maybe might like to be on that list, but isn't particularly interested in the prayer part of it, isn't particularly interested in devoting herself in that way. Paul says, give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. We don't want anyone open to blame here, he says. It's worse than an unbeliever. You're worse than an unbeliever, he says, if you don't take care of your relatives, and especially those in your own house. Because even unbelievers do that, right? Even people who don't follow Jesus couldn't care less about God, or in Paul's world, worship other gods. Even they know, I got to take care of my parents. I've got to take care of my family. That's required. That's just the bare minimum of what it means to be a decent person. And Paul is afraid that the church there could could fall into these patterns of neglect of the elderly that would make everybody look at them and say, "You're worse than, you're worse than these folks. You're worse. You're the worst of all of us because you don't even take care of family. You don't even provide for your family." And Paul says that's a denial of the faith. Again, think of the Ten Commandments. Think of Jesus. The whole thing about how some of the Pharisees could take resources that would already be that would otherwise be given to their families, to their parents, and used to care for their parents, and instead they would devote them to God. And whatever they were doing, Jesus says, "Come on, you're playing with words there. You're playing with semantics, and what you're doing is you're not caring for your family, and you need to stop it."
We have a very good example of a godly widow. I'll mention it in Luke 2:36. Remember Anna? She was a prophetess.
Yep.
The daughter of Penuel of the tribe of Asher. She was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then was a widow until she was 84. She never left the temple, it says, but worshiped night and day, fasting and praying. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Israel.
Yeah.
Well, that's what he's getting at. That's
Absolutely.
that person.
Absolutely. That's exactly what he's looking at. Somebody like Anna, who, and I think that was something that probably in the Judaism of Paul's day was, if not common, at least was something that was, recognized. This sense of, widows who could be cared for. The fact that she never left the temple tells me, she lived there with the priests. She lived there with the folks who were, who had rooms and had accommodations, and that was where she stayed. That was her home, and so Paul's sort of picturing that, not in a building necessarily, but he's picturing that in the church in Ephesus. These women who would be devoted to prayer, devoted to service in the kingdom of God. And the church would be caring for them and looking after their needs. And he mentions this list in verse 9, where he says, "No widow may be put on the list of widows unless she is over 60, has been faithful to her husband, and is well known for her good deeds, such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the Lord's people, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds." So, here's the guidelines, right? Here's the qualifications. She's got to be over 60. We'll see in a moment why over 60 is important. She's got to be it says she's the wife of one husband, which is similar to something we've already seen, right? The elder was to be the husband of one wife. This is the reverse there, the wife of one husband. I think we talked about it with the elders. The idea seems to have been in Paul's day what the NIV here says: faithful to her husband, faithful to her husband, faithful to his wife. Not necessarily she's never been married more than once, but that she is faithful to her husband. She's a faithful wife to him. Well known for good deeds, and those good deeds involve such things as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the Lord's people. What is that? Washing the feet. What's that?
An act of hospitality back then, because
Okay.
Somebody
somebody's
came
house.
to dinner at your, okay.
It connects to hospitality. It connects to service. It may just be sort of a figurative way of talking about, serving God's people, serving the church, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds. So it's just a woman whose life demonstrates that she is caring for others. She is compassionate. She's loving. She wants to meet the needs of the people around her. She's a servant. She's devoted to the church and to their well-being. And so, so this is the kind of widow he says you should be putting on that list, you should be caring for. As for younger widows, do not put them on such a list, for when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. Thus, they bring judgment on themselves because they've broken their first pledge. He seems to picture that the widows on this list will make some sort of a commitment, some sort of a pledge to serve the Lord in prayer and in the service to the church and service to the kingdom as they are supported by the church. And Paul has these younger women, these younger widows who might be put on that list, but he says he pictures, what happens when they want to remarry? What happens when they decide, I'd like to get married again? Maybe I was a little hasty in making this pledge that I made to the church. And Paul says, that's not pleasing to God at all. They bring judgment on themselves in doing that. You don't want to be a part of that. So that's why he says, don't put younger widows on that list. Besides, they get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house. And not only do they become idlers, but also busybodies who talk nonsense, saying things they ought not to. This probably has to do with the false teaching that was prevalent in Ephesus that seemed to really be gaining a foothold among some of the women of the church. And so perhaps that's a reference to that specifically.
Oh, I think we're developing a lazy faith.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so it pictures this, yeah. So he pictures these younger widows who are kind of getting into trouble because maybe they haven't been ready to make this vow that they made, and maybe they'd be better off. He says in verse 14, I counsel younger widows to marry, to have children, to manage their homes, and to give the enemy no opportunity for slander. Some have in fact already turned away to follow Satan. So this is sort of the picture he has here of these widows, and this is what he counsels.
So better they marry and have children than be lazy in the church.
Yeah. Better they marry and have children, he says, that because that's
Be busy.
that's sort of the assumed path that women in Paul's world would take. In our world, when you've got a younger woman who's no longer married, but she has other things in her life. She has a job. She has other things perhaps going on. Maybe the advice would be somewhat different. But in Paul's world, what are the choices? You got a widow, right, who loses her support, and who now she's got a choice to make. Do I go on this list and be supported by the church, or do I go and remarry? And Paul says, if those are your two choices, go remarry. Go do that.
What would they have, I guess it would have been very unusual to have a woman who never married. And I'm assuming that a woman in that position would stay at home with her parents and would be under her father's supervision. But what if, say, the parents are gone and you just have this single woman? Is that not something that would have happened?
The impression I have, what I understand, I'm no expert, what I understand is it would have been rare, exceedingly rare, to have a woman of marriageable age who was not married. I'm not saying it never happened, and there may be some other some that may mean she's an exception in some way to some of these rules, but it would be rare.
If you read English literature, in it was a very hard life for a young woman or a woman in a, in a, I wouldn't call it middle class. I don't know that there was a middle class back then, but you know, a daughter in a family who didn't marry, if something happened to the parents, they were in a really hard position. There were very
Yes.
few choices for them as
Yes.
far as being able to make a living, because, and a lot of this, that was seen as kind of a shameful
Yeah.
thing if you had to do that, and especially like if she didn't have any brothers or anything, oftentimes the inheritance would go to someone, to another male in a totally different
Yeah.
place, because estates couldn't be inherited by one. So, it's sort of the same kind of thing. I mean, it just seems like a very very harsh life
It would be.
for
Yeah.
women who don't have a male protector, I guess.
Even Laura's grandmother, 2 generations ago, Laura's grandmother, her husband died when Laura's mom was 6, I think. And they had, I think it was 6 children. I could name them all and count them up, but I think it was at least 6 kids that she had in kind of rural East Tennessee. She didn't have a lot of options. She was sort of stuck in a lot of ways, and she had to really kind of hustle, kind of scramble to make ends meet. And as soon as the sons could, they were coming to Chicago, coming to New York, going places where there was work, because there weren't options. Even that's 2 generations ago, and so. Yeah, I mean, this is the situation. Keep in mind here, what Paul's getting at is, all right, we've got these widows, we've got these women who are in need, but some are more in need than others. So let's make sure we're taking care of those who are most in need, and those who have options, whether it's family, whether it's remarriage. Let's let them make sure they pursue those options, and let's be sure that we're looking after particularly those who are really in need. I don't think we ought to get too hung up on the restrictions here that reflect probably more Paul's world than ours. But that seems to be the big picture, right? That all right, we've got widows who are in need. Let's make sure the widows who are really in need are the ones that we are looking out for. And if you've got a widow in your family, you ought to be taking care of them, he says, right? You ought to be looking after them. So I just like that. I just like that sort of picture again of the church caring for each other in very practical ways. And I think we can still do that for one another, even though the needs change in various ways. We have Social Security, we have Medicare, we have safety nets for older people, but that doesn't begin to cover it for a lot of older folks, and it doesn't cover the whole range of the things we need as human beings, right? And the church can help provide for some of those things, perhaps. And it's also probably important to say, older people here in Ephesus, they have a part to play as well. They can be of service to the church through prayer, through service, through hospitality. They can be of service as well. They're not put out to pasture because they no longer have anything to offer. So I think that's kind of an important thing to see here. If any woman is a believer, has widows in her care, verse 16, she should continue to help them and not let the church be burdened with them, so that the church can help those widows who are really in need. Other thoughts about the widows there, or in general about generational relationships? It's good when a church has lots of generations. It's good when we have lots of generations. We learn to love each other. We learn to get past some of the differences and some of the different ways we see the world, and we learn that we can be that we can bless one another through our different perspectives. I really enjoy being with our teenagers. To me, that's a really encouraging thing, to be. Maybe I'm immature, it's an encouraging thing for me to spend time with them, and I think they help me more than I help them, probably. So verse 17 then, the elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching. Here's honor again, double honor. And this is, as we're going to see, Paul has something specific in mind. For scripture says, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain, and the worker deserves his wages. For quite a few years, when Alan still actually handed me a paycheck, he would say, time to unmuzzle the ox. It was always gave me a chuckle.
It's actually in Deuteronomy.
Yes,
That's true.
yes.
Right there too.
So this is again, we're sort of on this theme of honor, right? For those who are older, those who deserve this honor, and he pictures elders who are doing their work well, especially when they are preaching and teaching. Paul says they're worthy of, give them some support, give them some financial help, take care of them that way. We don't always think of doing that for elders, and there are other ways to honor elders as well. Again, in our world, perhaps things are a little different, and the needs are a little different. But this is another way. He says you can make sure to care for those who are worthy of this honor, helping in the church and helping in preaching and teaching, particularly. As one who benefits from that, I'm glad that verse is there. Verse 19, do not entertain an accusation against an elder unless it is brought by 2 or 3 witnesses. 2 or 3 witnesses, of course, comes from Judaism, from the Old Testament. It is a principle that you see all through the Old Testament. Anytime there's a judicial setting of any sort, anytime there's some kind of dispute to argue, the presence of 2 or 3 witnesses is important. Not just one witness, right? You got to have a couple, maybe 3. So he says, if somebody comes and accuses an elder of wrongdoing, and he's the only one saying anything about it, then don't give that any traction. Unless it is brought by 2 or 3 witnesses. Can you think of times when that doesn't seem, well, what do you think about that? What do you think about that verse 19?
I think, well, it says here, it applies, to an accusation against an elder, but I would think that would apply to an accusation against pretty much any person.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus kind of implies that, doesn't he? When he talks about if somebody sins against you,
Right.
go just by yourself. If that doesn't work, take 2 or 3 people with you, and let them be, kind of involved in this thing. On the other hand, I certainly know of times when there's been one accusation against a church leader that turned out to be very true and needed to be dealt with. So I'm not sure you want to necessarily make this a a hard and fast, set in stone rule. Uh, as much as just, let's be careful about listening to discontent, all discontent, right? If you're in a leadership kind of position, there's going to be somebody pretty much all the time dissatisfied with something you're doing, right? So I think he's sort of trying to keep us from dealing with from listening to every little squeaky wheel without giving it proper perspective. On the other hand, if two or three people are saying the same thing, then maybe you got a problem that needs to be dealt with. But I also think if there's an accusation of abuse, I mean, that's got to be dealt with. That can't be ignored. That can't just be disregarded. We have to, address things like that. There's things that I think we got to have a little common sense in some of these things. There's things that if there's an accusation, it needs to be addressed in some way. It needs to be dealt with in some way.
So criminal behavior that's not gonna have 2 or 3 witnesses.
That's right. That's right.
A good example.
That's right. Yeah, an abuser is trying to be careful not to have too many witnesses to what they're doing. Sometimes what happens is when somebody makes an accusation, others follow. You see that, but I have a friend whose father was an elder in the church who was accused of abuse of a child, and sure enough, he was. But it was one accusation. Thankfully, they didn't take this as a law that says we've got to just disregard this. They looked into it. Verse 20, those elders who are sinning, you are to reprove before everyone, so that the others may take warning. It's sort of this picture of when somebody is, needs to be reproved, do it in a way that the other elders, notice and take warning of, and maybe beyond just the other elders, the other others in the congregation. And I charge you, he says, in the sight of God and Christ Jesus and the elect angels, to keep these instructions without partiality and to do nothing out of favoritism. Because the easiest thing in the world, right, is when somebody is in the position of authority and some degree of power and control, the easiest thing in the world is to, sweep things under the rug, right? That's just sort of the way power works in our world. You just sweep stuff under the rug. And Paul says we don't want to ever be guilty of that. We don't want to ever be guilty of being partial in the way we deal with these things. Nothing out of favoritism. And he says in verse 22, don't be hasty in the laying on of hands. What's laying on of hands?
Blessing someone?
Blessing in a particular way. He's talking about what some people would call ordination. He's talking about appointing an elder, right? Don't be hasty about that. Don't jump into that, because you could very well. He talks about sharing in the sins of others. In other words, you appoint somebody as an elder who shouldn't be an elder. You're sort of complicit in in whatever they're doing that is destructive, and so we don't rush to do that. We don't do that quickly or easily.
Why would that necessarily be on him? I mean, we don't do things that, we it seems to me that there's always a deliberation by the current group of elders as to whether they think someone might be qualified to be an elder. It isn't really up to one person.
Yeah, Paul seems to have left Timothy and Titus sort of with his own authority to appoint elders. I think is Is it Timothy or is it Titus? One or the other begins with um well, I left you anyway, it seems like I'll look into that a little more, but it seems like, and I can't right now, the verse won't come to me. It seems like Paul left uh, Timothy and Titus in place so that sort of um, in his name or in his authority, they could appoint elders when that was feasible. And so I think maybe it would have been something that in this case would have been done by Timothy or Titus. And so and yes, that's not really the way we do it. But we could still, I mean, still even the church, even doing it as we do it, it could still be possible to be a little hasty in naming someone an elder and when we shouldn't be doing that. And that's one of the reasons that, that we sort of do it the way we do it with trying to get um, Laura says Titus 1:5, yeah. I thought one of them began, either one of the pastorals began with that. The reason I left you in Crete was that you might put in order what was left unfinished and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. So, you know, Titus at least had that authority, and probably Timothy did too, based on this verse that we're looking at, that to do that. But even if we're doing it more the way it's generally done in churches of Christ that I'm aware of, you can still be hasty, and he wants people to take that seriously. Wants the church to take that seriously. A little bit of direct advice to Timothy now: stop drinking only water and use a little wine because of your stomach and your frequent illnesses. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? He just sort of drops that into this letter. Just by the way, Timothy, you know, drinking all that water is just killing you. You need to use a little wine for your stomach's sake. Wine in Paul's day, in the Greco-Roman society, wine generally was diluted 3-to-1, 2-to-1, something like that. It was a pretty 3 parts water to 3 parts water or 2 parts water to 1 part wine.
Was it because water could often be
Yeah, yeah.
unhealthy,
I mean,
kind of,
yeah.
contaminated?
Yeah, can you imagine what was in water in in ancient Rome? Can you imagine what kind of organisms were running around? It's why people died of cholera and dysentery and things like that all the time. And poor Timothy's, having a hard time with his stomach, and for whatever reason, maybe related to the false teaching and some of the stuff that's going on in Ephesus. For whatever reason, he's kind of said, "I'm not going to drink any wine." And Paul says, "Don't do that. You need to have a little bit." He's not encouraging Timothy to go down a bottle every night. He's just saying, just be smart. You're gonna, I need you there. Be a little smart in the way you.
The Christians who love to drink alcohol like this verse.
It
That
is.
justifies their imbibing. I don't buy it, but
Well, I mean, at the very least, what you can say is Paul didn't think it was always wrong for a Christian to have some wine. Verse 24, then, the sins of some are obvious, reaching the place of judgment ahead of them. The sins of others trail behind. In the same way, good deeds are obvious, and even those that are not obvious cannot be hidden forever. Sort of a summing up, right, of what he's been talking about here. Whether you do good or evil, eventually it's going to catch up with you, and eventually it's going to be known. And so obviously we want to do good, do good deed, do good things, do good, and those are going to be known. All right. Well, thank you for your comments and your thoughts. I feel like I talked a lot. Maybe next week we'll talk a little more. You'll talk a little more. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your week. Good to see all of you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Everybody,
God bless y'all. Have a great week.
you too.
Yeah, stay warm.
Jacob.